guys are good to go.
Ready?
Yeah.
Today we're going to discuss the 5A and 6A area sheets, which are also the same as the state 1A through 4A sheets for UIL. I thought we might divide this discussion into new area music sheets into a couple parts. We'll first talk about the ensemble performance box. We're asked to talk about, as judges, about phrasing, artistic expression, blend and balance, precision and timing, dynamic contrast and style. As a judge, these are all the descriptors we'll see on the region sheet. How do you begin to zoom in on these as an area judge? Rich, could you answer that first?
Absolutely. I believe that as I'm listening to a group and I look at that particular first area of ensemble performance, I think of the word together. When you look at, are they together when they start and stop their notes? Are they together when they play their phrases? Are they together when they get loud? Are they together when they get soft? And so I just, are they together in their approach to the musical phrases and lines?
Mm-hmm. Andy, what do you think about when you see that first ensemble performance box?
Well, I think first of all, I think there's a lot of really awesome things in this ensemble box out there. And the thing that I want to be aware of as a judge or feel is intent and purpose. That there's been decision-making going on there and that the performers are following the plan. We want to hear that with regard to dynamics. We want to hear that with regard to phrasing. We want to hear that in terms of the uniformity of the style of articulation that they're playing or the way the articulation is being delivered. So that choices have been made and the performers are executing that choice. So some really purposeful and thoughtful intent of the music.
Intentional there.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good. Randy, what do you think about that first box?
Well, I want to agree with both of these gentlemen. As a judge, when you get into the area level, one, you're trying to, at that point, trying to determine and put a group in order. And so as I am doing that and listening to that, I am trying to the point of where does the group go? Are they doing the phrasing? Are they doing the dynamics? Okay, did this one group present more a picture in the dynamics? Was there more expression in that? As far as, so to allow me to be able to more accurately put each group where they need to be in that. So as these two gentlemen have already commented, all of those things, the blend, the balance, the precision, are we not having precision problems front to back or side to side? Is there some musical expressions that you're using dynamics to help us bring forth the picture that is there? So I'm trying to determine, looking into that, how do I get the points in that when I'm doing that? So.
You hit a really good point. I think on the new sheets that everyone's going to be able to see, there are descriptor boxes now. They're placed not only on the sheet, but it's among every category. When you're talking about where a group belongs, there's boxes that include always, consistently, usually, sometimes, and rarely. And of course, at the area level, we already have, or even at the state level, we have some above average ensembles, so we'll be using a lot of those top boxes, but our minds definitely should be kind of going there, what everybody was kind of alluding to what degree are we doing those things? Are we together, of course, being intentional, and of course, being able to say this group all of a sudden can be great in timing, great in performance, great in execution. So I think it's going to be great, and the judges, I think, are going to love it when they get to see this. Let's go to the next question. The next three boxes on the sheet focus on woodwind, brass, percussion with similar descriptors across the three groups. Tone quality, intonation, technique and accuracy, and blend and balance. As an area judge or a state judge for the 1A through 4A classes, how do you best assess these from the press box? What are some things you're listening for? Randy, can we start with you first on this?
Yes. So as a judge, one of the things that I am listening for is you have your percussion, you have your brass, and you have your woodwinds. Are they all equally represented in the musical presentation that's being given? And I think that it's important. I know from the 1A to the 4A area, sometimes there may be a woodwind group or a brass group that is not as strong as the other group. And a director will at times doing the very best they can with what they've been given. But for me as a judge, as I'm trying to determine that, I am looking to see that they're all equally represented. I know there's been times that I've watched groups that, man, great percussion, great brass, and then the woodwinds aren't as strong or represented as well. And so if I'm going to rank that, I'm going to be looking for the group that is equally represented across the show production on there, and that they're covering all of those. There is good tone quality, there is good intonation consistently, okay, or as you talked about, always there. The technique, how is the technique of the group? Is it appropriate for that classification? And then, of course, the accuracy there. But that's what I am listening for, and as a judge in those particular area and state, I am going to work very hard to try to give those groups that show that equally across everything the higher points. In fact, as I judge, I have those little boxes there, and I'll, the brass may get this point, and the woodwinds aren't as good, and they'll get down. And I'll do every band will be done separately, and then whatever the number comes out that's what my number is in the end.
I think your group is a great example of that. I judged at state this year, and I judged the North Lamar group, and you're a great example of being able to showcase that. I remember several throw-down woodwind moments in your show right off the bat where they're playing lots of technique, and then it was followed up with the brass moment and how it was real well put together. So, again, it was designed in a way, and I think as directors, that could be a new arena for some of us that are going. But then, of course, as adjudicators, we're looking for everyone to get showcased, but also getting a chance to what degree of excellence are each of those groups being represented along the way. Andy, what do you think about some of the woodwind, brass, and percussion boxes there?
Well, first of all, I really like, again, the descriptors. And of course, they're identical on the woodwinds and the brass side. For me, the thing that I'm looking for and listening for is, do the instruments sound like the instruments? Are we asking of our performers what is pedagogically appropriate and music educationally appropriate? I'm not sure that's good English, so you may have to cut that. But whatever is appropriate for student performers. So we want the instruments to sound like the instruments. We have to make sure that we're, again, for me, I'm listening for basic woodwind choir concepts, basic brass choir concepts. Are we making an attempt in the performance to show all of the colors possible in that ensemble with what the mechanism, the instrument that we have to work with, and by instrument I mean the show that we have to work with there. Are we seeing those colors? I think we have to try to have our groups and the groups that we're evaluating toe the line with regard to tone quality and intonation. We have to have a sense about all of that. We have to have a sense in the design effort and all of that about what are we trying to feature, and we can't, or we should look for, in my opinion, the variety of colors present, the variety of presentations of the brass ensemble or the woodwind ensemble and what their respective components are. We're making choices all the time about whether we're going to feature this group or not. Well, is it a group we should be featuring? Are we really presenting the supporting elements in such a way that the feature comes across that way? And so there's a lot of picking and choosing that have to go on in the decision side of that for us to award credit in the performance side of that. But I think we have to expect the instruments to sound like the instruments without distortion, that we're making all those dynamic changes without distortion that we ask the kids to do, and that the fundamental tone of the ensemble is what we want the ensemble to sound like. Now, that may be a subjective thing. We may all have different definitions slightly of what that is. And tolerance levels, too, is a good way to put it. And lastly, in that regard, the percussion section, are we having expectations of the percussion section about color, about dynamics, about role responsibility? That can, percussion section can dominate the entire ensemble at any given moment sometimes if we let them.
Sure.
But what role are we expecting them to play in the ensemble as a whole? And so I think exploring the colors of the drum section and then expecting them to not only be clean, so to speak, in what we're expecting, but what is their role as a percussion section in that? And then we should have the same expectations of our winds on the field as we do inside the band hall. It should not be a different expectation, and we should have really demanding standards for that.
Great. Rich, any thoughts?
I agree with all that. But as I'm sitting here thinking, I can't remember the year. You had a show, and I judged it at State, and you had an oboe player that was the ballad, but it was the pre-show was a piece of music that tagged to that. And you opened the show with a woodwind moment, and just immediately you went, wow, what, and you color, what beautiful sounds. And then the brass came in. And when the brass came in, you didn't lose the woodwinds. And for me, I think that's very important that we, as you mentioned, and when you play a piece of concert literature inside, it's not, okay, just woodwinds and then just brass and then just oboe. It's everybody, and you want to hear everybody. And I think that's one of the challenges at judging is because you do want to give woodwinds credit and you want to give brass credit, but it doesn't always have to be a feature where they're down parked. And we've learned and that you don't have to do that. And sometimes getting the ensemble to sound good, it's just a balance. It's like changing the way you balance so that you do hear the woodwinds even though the brass are playing. And back to the quality sounds and the quality intonation, those are all a given. You want to have that. But it comes back to why can't the whole band play? And I think your band does this really well. The whole band plays and you hear that color from
Hear all
top
the
to bottom.
colors, yeah.
It's not just trombone heavy. It's you hear the brass, you hear the woodwinds, and it's just beautiful. And then when you have that, it's just a big sound. And I think from a judge standpoint, I'm looking for that. I'm also looking, do you feature? Can they play? Do they have technique? Are they showing off? But at the same time, is it all quality? And it comes back to is it clear what I'm supposed to be listening to, and is there clarity to it?
I think one thing for our strong evaluators, we create those moments. We're creating those opportunities there, but really you can hear each of these judges talking about, hey, it's going to be down to the quality part of it. Or we featured them in a way that we really think that's the best way to support them. Or like, well, we're asking those brass players to play way out of bounds right now. And as an adjudicator, we have to say we're giving as much credit as we can. And we, again, circle back to, was it usually having good tone quality? Or was it always having good tone quality? Or the technique being clear, et cetera? And I'd love to hear all three of you kind of reiterate that. That's an important theme, not only for our teachers, but especially for people that are evaluating. The experts, when you're asked to judge, it's okay to make that call. Just because they have that moment doesn't mean you have to say you maxed out woodwind technique and credit. It's to what degree did they able to be successful, whether it be effective or excellence at that same level. Okay. Next question. Lastly, on the area music sheet, we focus on content. While this is a portion of the region sheet, here at Area, we're investing 150 of our 1,000 available points to offer a numerical score for content. The first few descriptors include coordination and effective use of all performing elements, effective visual reinforcement of the music, suitability of the musical content. How do you go about offering a score in an area like this? Andy, can I have you start this one off here? That's a lot of information.
Well, you know, there is a lot of stuff there. But I do think, again, I know I said this twice, I'm going to say it one more time. I think these descriptors are really awesome. I think it's a great place to frame this discussion and frame the inner discussion that goes on in your mind as an adjudicator with all of these things. For me personally, does the visual reinforce the music is really, really important. I think it's really easy to get that cart and horse necessarily musical content and music education and student achievement. They're geared to think effect. And if you sound bad, you are affecting me badly. Your general effect is affecting me generally badly if you sound bad in your ensemble. And so I think we have to look at visually, are we seeing what we're hearing from the ensemble? Big music needs big visual in some way. Small, intimate music needs small, intimate visual component. That can be a guard thing, it can be a drill thing. There's lots of things, and we're probably cross-captioning here somehow, but this goes to content.
Right.
And it goes to the decision and the design-making process. Is it suitable? A subjective thing, but for me, that involves rigor, vigor, and challenge. Is it a vigorous performance? Is the energy of performance there? Is the challenge in the musical material? Because I think for those of us here, I think I can speak that this is a really important thing for us. And I think curriculum-wise, what we select is music. That becomes our curriculum in so many ways for the fall. And so we need music that's going to challenge our
Right,
kids.
exactly,
And then we need the physical challenge that goes with that. We do have to make decisions, both as directors and as adjudicators, about whether we want to march and play then march, dance then play.
Right.
You know, there's lots of different ways to go.
It's
And
choices.
somehow the evolution of the activity takes us away from that sometimes, or takes us in different directions that we have to make subjective judgments about. But on the sheet, it asks us to respond to the frequency of musical demand and visual demand, simultaneous demand. So we have to be able to respond to that. We have to be able to respond to challenge. So I want to feel as an adjudicator like I'm seeing what I'm hearing, and vice versa. There's a reciprocal relationship there, certainly. And I want to feel that the material has musical challenge to it. That's not limited to here or here. That's listening challenge, environmental challenge, simultaneous demand of choreography. Man, there's so much stuff that goes into that. And then we want to listen and evaluate how the ebb and flow of the musical program is with regard to tension and release of the whole thing. I mean, it's an overall arch that we're really going through. So there's a lot of components, and I apologize for talking a long time on that, but there is a lot of stuff in that we have to make decisions on as band directors and as the design process goes on. But once it's out there, we have to make sure the judge can hear and see what we want them to hear and see. Sometimes it's a balance thing, as Rich pointed out accurately. Sometimes it's a supporting elements versus the melody. So all those decisions that are regarding content and challenge also, I think, are balanced and blend things in the ensemble category because are we creating the environment to see and hear what we need to with regard to priority of line, accompaniment versus melody versus counterline versus, whatever that is, rhythmic accompaniment. So we're back to that percussion element.
Great.
A lot of words, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. So many great points. Either of you have anything to add to that?
I don't have anything to add, because what Andy said was fantastic. I would just, as a director, as you start this process, just remember there are times, you need to take what he said, and then in your rehearsals, okay, if you're trying to do some technique spot, and you're trying to figure out what kind of visual are you going to march here, don't be afraid to make it easier. If you come up with some visual and all of a sudden you're realizing that it's not working, it's going to take too long to get it to the level it needs to be, it's not worth the effort, then be willing to modify it to where the kids will be successful, and then you're going to be successful as a program.
Even more effective, probably, in a lot of ways.
And even more effective, and never, in my opinion, never cut the expectation on your music, the musical part of it.
Great.
So.
As I'm listening to Andy, I'm thinking, oh my gosh. As a director, you mentioned that, as a director, before you even hand something to the kids, these descriptors need to be discussed as a staff. They need to be discussed as a team to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. And so you have the end in mind. And something I'm thinking about is less is more. Less is more. Sometimes we try to get more content out there, and we think that more done in the usual middle of the box is better, when in reality, less done in the always box would be way more effective. And so as a judge, making sure, you're notating those things that are at that very top always box, and what's done, what are they trying to do too much, and notating that. And I think when you design the content, that's important. Less is more. And you mentioned, if you're not getting something right in the middle of the process, I mean, if it's just not happening, less is more. And I think a good adjudicator will pick up on that, and the quality and the excellence level will go up.
You guys all hit really on several of my questions. I'm going to jump down to question 5 next, but thank you for those thoughtful answers. The new sheets tie the descriptors to scoring specific language. When you're judging on this sheet at either the area or state level, how do these scoring ranges when you're ensuring that your numbers match your commentary? So really, it's score analysis, and now it gets to be more of a kind of a judge speak part of this. Randy, could you start us off with that? Some of your thoughts?
Well, one of the things on the descriptor sheets, I think they're fantastic, and not only helping us as judges be able to know where to place a group, but if we will use the terms that are on there in our descriptions, then it's going to help a director understand where, in our opinion, that they were at on that. Also, based on just exactly what Rich said on the previous question, we need to work toward our program that is in the always. We're trying to get to there. So as we're designing, as we're rehearsing, as we're working, is it happening? Are we being successful on getting that? But as far as for me, when I am judging, I am consistently using those descriptors to help me put that group in the very best possible
It starts
chance.
kind of settling in, doesn't it, after a while? It kind of, they keep coming more familiar. They're telling you who they are. It becomes like we're a sometimes kind of group, or we're an always kind of a group. It starts happening.
I am so thankful that we have gone to this even a few years ago. I feel when I judge, I feel such a weight. Okay, we all know that we've spent so many hours doing this, to just a weight to get it the most accurately that I possibly can.
Yes.
For those students, for that directors, for the school, for the city that they're representing. So,
Rich, any thoughts with that?
You're taking art, which is subjective, and trying to add an objective element to it. And I think the descriptors do that
It quantifies it, yeah.
pretty well. And, you know, the first note, if it's not right, always is gone. So as you're playing a performance, teaching kids, I think there's a value to teaching kids to perform where every note's important, every phrase is important, and you design a show that allows them to achieve, and that's part of the whole process. And as a judge, I mean, it's a way to this group very rarely made a mistake. They're more in the always category versus this group that sometimes the brass hit a chord in tune and sometimes they don't. So I think it just allows you to be more objective in the process of judging and not rely on, well, how do I feel about that group, especially at the area level where you may see 32 groups with your typical 15-minute break every 6 or 8 bands, and then you have a lunch. I think that's extremely important to be on top of your game as a judge, so that you're not missing somebody randomly, because there's no dropping of numbers in marching.
Right.
And so every number matters. And so it's important that you get your rankings absolutely correct. And you don't hear this one group in 22 when they're really probably more like 19, or they're even higher,
You have
15.
them kind of slotted.
I think that's important as a judge.
I agree.
So it helps with that.
Agree. Andy, any thoughts on that one?
I think by using the vocabulary as an adjudicator, it helps us frame the score we're putting down. I mean, that's something these guys really just said. And as a director, that frames why we got the number that we got from that judge. Now, it is subjective, absolutely. However, that helps, the verbiage in here helps us be more consistent as adjudicators and helps justify the numeric value in that category.
If you hear yourself saying the word sometimes a lot, and then all of a sudden your number doesn't quite match that, and vice versa, like that should be a red flag. It should be, well, wow, I kept saying mostly. Well, you've almost got it. You're there. A lot of times you did this. You're telling all the ensemble most likely, hey, this is probably the range of scores we're going to be in. And that should also tell you, hey, I said this more. I remember my reflection on this. I should probably be looking in this range, not because I happen to know the director and like this group more. I like that style of music. I didn't all of a sudden push it a different place in the list. You have a certain place where it's the neighborhood is what we call it, where they should live. Along the same lines as that, as we're looking at the sheets for future reference, The point totals, even within those lines, you can actually see them, how they're kind of on a bell curve. It's not equal number of points in always or consistently and usually. You think about where most groups lie, and you could see those last few points for, let's say, even the always portion, as we look down the page. It's a special group. It's a special group that gets to there. It's intentionally not as broad as the other groups, knowing how a typical contest dynamics kind of plays out here. So we'll have that in some of our future discussions in our webinar. Let's move ahead. Now let's shift the focus to speaking to as a teacher and a designer. When you enter into conversations about the content boxes, how do you ensure you're crafting a show that will provide a vehicle for your students to maximize their opportunities at the end of the season? Rich, could you start us off there?
Wow.
And yes, you are an acclaimed director, so you get to.
Well, no, that's kind of you. I don't know if we figured this out yet, but we keep talking about this. What do we want our kids to play? What kind of literature? Andy talked about it earlier. It is the curriculum for a lot of the fall, on top of, the other things that we ask our kids to play. And are we playing quality literature that's going to challenge the students? And how are we going to put that on the field? And how are we going to, we have been hit by standing and playing good things, but not moving and playing good things. And so what can we move and play? Where are we going to move and play? So we're making some changes this year with our program, where instead of parking woodwinds to play something that has worked sometimes but usually doesn't,
Right.
why can't we just take great music and let the woodwind line move as it naturally moves, and make sure you hear the woodwinds as they're playing that? And Andy even mentioned the woodwind line doesn't have to be always technical. It could be just a beautiful moment where you're like, those woodwinds are gorgeous. So intentionally making sure we have that in the show, making sure that we are marching, telling the designers, move, and if they don't, rewrite the drill immediately to make sure that it moves.
Right.
Because playing and moving is what marching band is, so you can't just stand still all the time.
Right.
And I think, the end is in mind. I mean, the end for us would be state marching contest, making it to the finals, and knowing that the quality of band programs out there they're just amazing. And the talent is amazing, and the individual players as you go down the line are amazing. How do you hold your own with that? And what we've learned is just be unique to yourself. Make sure your program is for your kids. Who do you have this year? And what can they do? What can they do today? What will they be able to do by the end? And what's that process?
Right.
And we're not afraid of changing. A lot of programs, they get a program and they just stick with it, and they don't fix it when something doesn't work. And we are, I don't know if pride is the right word, but we're okay swapping out a number. We're okay swapping out something that was a woodwind moment and making it a brass moment and relearning it, because it's going to allow the woodwinds to set up for something else. So just keep giving your kids the best chance to be successful at the end by looking at the design process every day.
Let it be
Not one
organic
time.
and let it be more fluid, and it'll kind of play itself out, and don't be afraid of changing. So
Well, if it sounds good, and as you said earlier, if it sounds bad, it affects me poorly.
Yeah.
So if it sounds good, there's some quality to that.
Right.
It may not be
Good with
what
it.
you wanted. It may not be that super crazy high
Yeah.
trumpet lick, but
Yeah.
it still has a pleasantness to it.
Right.
That I think judges respond. And judges they don't want to have to find the beat. Judges don't want to have to find the line. As a judge, I don't want to go, if you want me to watch the individual, I can find the one guy that's out of step. I want to enjoy the musical performance for the sake of music. And I think sometimes that gets lost in marching band. We try to be DCI or marching band, as opposed to, that's just a great piece of
Right.
music that, wow, I want to hear more of that.
Right.
So I think designing, if it's not there when you start, it's probably not going to be there when you end.
a theme I've noticed through this, when we talked about this in the area visual sheets, we're showing value of every student on the field. Like we talked about the percussion role, the woodwind role, and of course, the musicians. What I love about this is we're giving everybody a chance to moment to shine. We want the show to exist not in a vacuum. We're like, oh, if the woodwinds are on the field, it wouldn't matter. Or if the brass only could go this. We want it to be where everybody gets a chance to be the lead part as the supporting character, also the lead actor in this. And I think these new sheets really lead us that direction. We talked about that in, of course, the visual area, getting a chance to showcase where the focus should be. But I love hearing you guys talk about that because that's a common theme, that every kid on the field matters. Every kid on the field gets a chance to be the leader of what we're doing. So, Andy, do you have any thoughts from this, from a teaching and or design standpoint?
I think Rich makes some really, really strong, important points. Number one, as the process is beginning, I think we always have to evaluate what are our relative strengths and our relative, assets and liabilities, if you were, and areas which we need to improve and areas which we have something to offer that's unique or something that's a strength of the program, and maybe you design certain things around them. Again, I reinforce the point a little bit that sometimes designers don't look through the same lens that we do as band directors, or in the sense of effect for effect's sake versus making every student important, student achievement.
Right.
In this, and student opportunity for student-generated achievement. I think those are real important. I do think, and Rich hit this really well as well, about make changes when it's not working. And I know we've been there, I suspect all of us
Of course,
have in
yeah.
this room, where we knew a change needed to be made, but we were very resistant to it for whatever reason. And second of all, that in spite of our best efforts, the highest visual demand and the highest musical demand were occurring at the exact same moment on the exact kids.
It's too much,
Right, and we knew it, and therefore we're backing the judges into a corner that's taking us away from always to sometimes. And so we know that this is happening, and so how do you overcome this? As Randy said, simplify. Less is more sometimes. All of those things I think are really important, that we take a step back. And no matter where we start, if we start on this process, heavens, in November and December now for really high achieving groups in some cases, that where we're really trying to be the next November is really a total evolution. And no matter what that program looks like in February, March, and April and May, that by the time kids get a hold of it and we start trying to put it on the field and we start trying to play that it becomes a different animal, and we have to make, again, informed decisions about how to evolve that correctly for our students to achieve, for adjudicators to be able to give us credit in that caption. And sometimes that is a case of rewrite, of simplify, of rethink this. And so I don't think we should underestimate the importance of this and not consider it failure or weakness to go back and have to reconsider things in these lights sometimes.
Right. Agreed. Yeah. Randy?
I agree with both of these gentlemen, but also when we start the process, one, we are looking at our student and ensemble and ability. Where are they at? Just like Andy said, where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses on that? And sometimes we'll get the music and it will be written something special for one person or one ensemble or one section, and it will change it. It will be sometimes changed before the kids ever get in on that. The other thing is that we're also looking, and Jason Smith is my associate director, and he just does a fantastic job with helping our marching program. But what is it going to do for our students? Like you said, that's our curriculum for the fall. So what is it going to do? How is it going to develop our intonation, our technique ability, our tone quality? How's it going to develop all that? So we're looking at how are we going to use this music that we're going to play so much to develop the rest of that, moving into the personal contests that our kids are going, like All-State, and then eventually actually into the concert season. And with that in mind, of course, we work on that all year long, but we want to kind of know what that's going to do. And then I can't agree more with these two guys again. You got to adjust. We have
Be
taken
flexible, yeah.
we have taken our show so many times, and we actually go and we march part of it, and then all of a sudden Jason and I are talking in a couple sets. Man, this ain't working.
Right.
And it gets rewritten. And sometimes in fact, the rewrites have always been better. They've always made more sense. The kids have been able to, as you said, all of a sudden they're getting to the always, part of the descriptor instead of maybe, sometimes. So it's just, that's part of some of what we do, and then just work together as a staff. A lot of times there's arguing going on, and that's okay. But,
The theme I kind of take away from some of this is you talk about the value of what you're doing. Of course, we talk about the what and the how so many times, and I love it because really it kind of boils down to the why. Is why are we doing this, and how are we preparing our students? Are we just playing notes for the sake of playing notes, or are we actually training them to do something that really could be, hey, you're as a musician overall, you need to know this, or something you're going to be playing in concert band later on that year. And it kind of comes back. I kept thinking that's why we're doing it. That's why we're doing it. You probably should ask that of your visual program in addition to your musical program at all times. So I love hearing that common takeaway.
If I could add one thing.
Yeah, please.
And I know it is so easy as a designer and a band director to look at the other groups, at what they're doing, and you go, wow, Blue Devils, Santa Clara. I want that. But then you realize, I don't have that. I don't have the infrastructure. I don't have the players. I don't have the culture. And what I've learned is do what you can do with what you have, and let that be, and not, because we get caught up in the numbers. We want to know how we rank.
Right.
We want to know the number. How can I design something that's going to get a better number than Flower Mound? Or why does Flower Mound get a better number than, say, Waxahachie? Or how does another group get it? And you realize there's subjectivity to the judging, but as a designer, what do you want to play, and why do you want to play that, and are you passionate about that, and let that drive the whole process. And if the number's great. If the number's not great, you're still achieving. I had a horn player. It's like, well, why can't we just go win everything? I said, because you can't. You can't do that. And what if you lose? You're going to be depressed. And so we don't want that. Focus on what our kids can do, like you mentioned earlier. What
What are we good at? Yeah. The best version of who we are, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there value to that line? And are they feeling that line? And you, from the very beginning, you talked about intent, and whether we call it intent or clarity, or it's very clear what we're supposed to listen to. Those things can happen, and kids can learn that, and that's important as musicians to teach our kids, so that transfers to the next piece of music, so their ears are understanding that without somebody having to tell them.
Right.
And I think that's all part of the design process. It's bigger than just 5 marching shows for the year.
Right.
You're developing musicians.
Great points, gentlemen. Appreciate that. We have a couple more questions. This is really thinking about from a rehearsal standpoint. When considering point of that, is any kind of takeaways of how you can really maximize what that individual student or their section, what their experience is on a weekly basis in rehearsal? Anybody want to start?
I'll start with that. One, just to make a point of what you said, we don't ever want anybody standing around. So ours, how the efficiency of rehearsals. Okay, so that takes a lot of time, as these gentlemen would know, with planning and stuff.
Yes.
But so if Jason is, in my case, who I work with, let's say he's teaching some drill to the brass on the field. Well, then I am under the trees, and we are working woodwind stuff. Our percussionists are somewhere doing something. Our guard is doing something. And there may be a point when he'll yell at me, "Hey, Randy, okay, can we switch?" And I'll be working with the brass, and he's out there doing that, knowing exactly what we're going to be working on. I mean, every rehearsal is laid out. And I'm kind of doing this from a teaching, just from years of experience, but every rehearsal is laid out to the minute. Now, does that always get exactly followed? No, it doesn't, but it's still the process is there. So we know by the end of the rehearsal, we're going to at least have covered
You hit
this.
your top priorities by the end of the day, yeah.
Another thing is that, okay, so as we look at our show, what technique-wise is going to take a month to develop?
Right.
Okay, or 6 weeks. Okay, so the first day with those technique sheets are ready, that process is ready, and we start breaking that down. Of course, there's all kind of ways to break it down, but we know that it's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight. So that we get into that. On our breathing, I have watched. For years I've been trying to figure out how to breathe well, and I remember I went to one of the seminars at TBA, and one of the Leander schools was doing these little PVC things. I thought, oh God, how simple is that?
Breathing tubes, yeah.
And just starting to learn stuff like that to make our process better. But I just kind of get back to and you can delve into this deeper, but the efficiency of the rehearsals. I mean, where are we going? What's the process on that? So.
And I think we could all even strive to add those descriptors to our rehearsals, couldn't we? Where we're always trying to do it, and then if we ever get to that level, but consistently, are we usually trying to make the best, most efficient plan? And I think all of us should challenge us as teachers. We're trying to work toward that, those same words in multiple usages here. Anything else to add, gentlemen, in that area about rehearsals, about trying to make them even more special for those individual students?
I would say we are blessed. I have, until the football program comes back to the high school, I have three fields that I have access to after school.
That's great.
Except for the one soccer I share with. So, like you mentioned, planning and designing and separating people out and having people go this way or that way. I've learned that when you work with designers, they are not minute by minute people. They are, give me this 4-hour morning block and let me be creative. And I'm like, that's when I should go play golf or find
That's right.
But I like to know, are you going to be using all the woodwinds when you do your choreographed stuff right here, or is it just this group? And so figuring out how to manage the staff in a way that gets the most optimum effect of getting things done.
Right.
And it really, I would start with the end in mind. What do we want the woodwinds to be able to do at the end of this day? What do we want the brass to be able to do? What do the percussion need? Do they need to be playing with everybody? Or are we having a problem lining the tubas up with the percussion? So they need to be on the big field with the tower, and the rest of them can be in sectionals working on notes. And I think it comes back to just, I think your comment about looking at these scriptures as it relates to practice and planning practice is smart.
Lots of applications, yes. Yeah.
Lots of planning.
I agree. Andy, anything?
Just briefly to reinforce, divide and conquer is important. I think the one thing as our programs become more successful or more aware, regardless of the amount of staff, we become aware that we become managers and facilitators. I know in the larger programs, where we're blessed with some contract staff, or we do have a percussion specialist that works in the cluster or whatever. Okay, so you're trying to accommodate that person and their time and what time they get to rehearsal. And when do they get to learn their dots, as opposed to, the woodwinds and brass already learned those dots, but the percussion have never learned those dots, more or less march them, or something like that. Or this is what the guard needs to know in order to be able to learn these dots, or they can learn dots now and they're going to have to do choreography later. It's so much of a variable thing, but we become managers and facilitators of the rest of our staff for their success. And I think the more that we can look at utilizing our staff, even if it's middle school staff or, somebody that can come in and help, the better off that we're going to be. But it takes us out of the role that we really love, which is being, in the music education part of it, in the rehearsal, but sometimes it takes us away. And secondly, to your point, this is completely away from what Rich was talking about in this sense in a way, but to your point about hey, when we're in rehearsal and we're addressing that brass moment, that woodwind moment, if we take a look at those descriptors right then, we're going to find out if we're on the right path or not. And then we hear it in context and you realize, wow, the low brass are playing so loud that I can't tell what the high brass are doing at all.
Cancel them out,
yeah. Or what the pit is doing is immediately canceling out what the woodwinds are doing because there's too much overlap in that part and it's too thick. And so looking at those descriptors in the context of those rehearsal elements that we've isolated is really helpful. And when we do a run through of something, or you're watching video of Friday night or something, you go back and go, yeah, if I'm sitting in the press box, there's no way I can credit
Right.
any of that that's going on. So we also become box checkers in a way, like, yeah, we are playing that in tune. Yay, raw
Right.
for us, but my gosh, we sound like a Razorback hog right there. We cannot check that box. So
Right.
we have to evaluate constantly against those descriptors, but it's really against our musical training as educators that we're really evaluating that against, or putting it in that framework all the time.
Wonderful. This has been, go ahead.
I have one other comment that I'd like to make.
Sure.
So I would encourage, really speaking maybe to the smaller school programs, though it can be all the way through the 6A. I know a lot of times in the larger schools that we hire techs and we have some ability there. But those of you that are in the smaller schools, a lot of times you don't even have the money, you don't have the ability. So I would encourage just for you to student leadership is to work with your students on, one, you're going to have to train them how to teach, and then that's going to have to be monitored sometimes. But let's say you've got a tuba section here, and but somebody needs to work with them, and you have a good leader in that group. Let them go work with that group. Teach them what needs to be covered in that area, how to break it down, and how to become a teacher. And use your student leadership to help you get your program to where it needs to be. Not only are you going to uplift these young people, but you're going to prepare them for reality in life that may give them the opportunity to grow in such a way that when they get out of high school, they're going to be successful somewhere.
Right.
Let them make the mistakes while they're with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but we use student leadership a lot in trying to develop not only that individual, but then help our
Out of
program.
necessity in some ways. And what a great experience to be able to be in high school and get to do that. I think we all do to some degree, but I know some programs have to do that for various reasons. So this has been really nice, gentlemen. Do you have any final thoughts, anyone, that we can get to talk about regarding the area music sheets?
I just want to make a comment, and this is specifically to the judging. I just want to encourage you, when you get the opportunity to judge, okay, one, the sheets that have been designed, the descriptions help us to judge and to use those. But I also want to encourage that you come from your comments from a positive standpoint. You want the director to be able to go back and, hey, let's listen to this judge. Okay, you don't want a director to go back and go, and the way the judge came across, the kids don't need to hear this.
Too harsh, yeah.
Yes, and so always be the teacher, and then there may be something that needs to be fixed on the field. But you can say it in such a way that it can be positive and you encourage. And I just want to encourage you, from a judging point, to make sure that your comments are always in such a way that you're uplifting the students, uplifting the group, okay, and never any derogatory type.
An educational moment. It's another teachable
Absolutely.
moment, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great. Anyone else have any other final thoughts?
I'd just like to applaud the effort to make to revise these sheets. It's been a Herculean task, no doubt, and we appreciate that for all of you that have had a major part in that process. What I would suggest for us as adjudicators and directors is to go back and look at these. Number one, it should not be an intimidation thing. I think if anything else, it more clearly reinforces the values of music that we should have, that it really establishes really good, strong, fundamental traditions about tone production and what we expect of kids and what we should expect of kids in a performance sense. And so I applaud the effort, and it's great that it's out there, but to take full advantage of these, we have to study them, and appreciate them and be aware of them as directors and utilize them as adjudicators and, utilize the rubric that goes with it and the scoring
Right.
and the vocabulary. But it's really a very, very positive step. And I don't think from a statewide consideration, it should be an intimidating step for us or something that folks are apprehensive about. I think it's a very positive step.
Thank you, thank you.
I would add a little bit. My bands all get better after I come back from judging something. It seems like, because in the back of my head, I'm like, nope, don't do that.
We don't do
Nope,
that either,
Don't do
yeah.
that.
Exactly.
And so there's a learning. And and I'm sitting here thinking, okay, how can I take what I've learned today in this discussion, and how can I help Rich Armstrong get a little bit better and his staff get better? But more importantly, take this one step further and teach the kids this rubric, because this rubric can be applied to medicine, engineering. It can be applied to so many different things in life when it comes to objectifying quality versus non-quality. And if kids are talking the vernacular,
language, yeah.
then they're thinking that. And if they're thinking that, then my job as a director is easier at getting that performance level from them. And so I can see myself spending time in summer band teaching this to my kids, or just making them aware of it.
Right.
And use, because as a director, you're going to use that out on the field. So we're all using this to get better.
Great. Great points, thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, good job.
Good job for you. Really good stuff, Rich.